you ever get accused of being like a sellout?
As an artist, and it goes into a system, it goes into the gallery system, they're selling it for money. Why, as an independent artist, are you not allowed to do the same thing and talk about it more frankly?
How do you feel about art school?
Art school is big business. If you look at the art system, we go through art school. We're not taught about business negotiations, contracts, consignments by design.
What do you think was a key catalyst of getting you into the art market?
I'm not really participating in the art market. Yes, I sell work, but it's not the primarily source of my income.
Do you feel like you're successful?
Do I feel like I'm successful?
Today on Deep Feed, I chat with Shantell Martin, an incredible world-renowned artist with a rich background in institutional projects, museum shows, brand collaborations, and special commissions. Shantell has really created a blueprint for how an artist can build a sustainable career outside of the traditional art system. In this episode, we chat about some critical moments that were pivotal in her growth, how she approaches the concept of personal branding as an artist, the role that social media has played in her success, and her tips for aspiring artists and creatives looking to build an entrepreneurial career doing what they love. Let's get into it. Shantell, how do you describe your work and creative philosophy today?
So it's a good question. So I describe my work as a meditation of lines, and they could be large scale, small scale, take different mediums, pop up in different industries. And I'm just trying to kind of figure out the story of who I am through those lines.
Yeah, your work has a very intuitive, free-flowing process to it, and you also often draw for a live audience. And I'm curious, how do you balance the intention with that spontaneity?
So I love drawing live because I think it makes you as honest as you can be with yourself. When you draw live, you don't have time to think, you don't have time to plan, you don't have time to hesitate, but most importantly, you don't have time to be anyone else but yourself. And I think especially with art, we've had decades of people, not that there's anything wrong with this, but people will make art and it's kind of behind the scenes, or maybe someone else is making it and then it pops up on a wall. And for me, that feels like there's a distance between it. But when you create work live in front of an audience, it creates that connection, it creates that experience. And in a way, it's like a collective experience and method of creation. And I love kind of bringing in the people, the atmosphere, the space into the work. So it feels as relevant and as specific to that moment in that time, in that place, in that space as possible.
Does live drawing ever make you nervous?
I think it only makes me nervous if I feel like I'm not doing what I'm meant to be doing. And that's the thing. It's even like public speaking. When you get on a stage and you're public speaking, I've only been nervous when I've tried to do something else other than what I would do. And I think it's the same with live drawing. When you're yourself, you are yourself. You're with yourself. You know yourself. And I think there's an ease about being you because you've been you for so long. And it's only when you try to skew away from that or do something that's a little bit outside of you, I feel like you get nervous. And having the practice of being me for a long time, I feel pretty confident and comfortable being me on stage, drawing, speaking, and all that stuff.
When did you first start doing live drawing and kind of feel like that was a big part of your process?
I think if I think back, I don't know if there's a specific time, but I always drew as a kid. I drew as a young adult. But I think when I went to art school, especially St. Martin's, I used to do a lot of just weirdo performances. Some were drawing, some weren't drawing. I remember showing up for school one day and everyone was presenting their projects. And I was like, okay, everyone, we're going to go outside. I got something to show you. And I had a big bottle of milk and I put holes in it and wrapped a string around it. And then I got everyone to come to this alleyway and I just swang the milk around. And the idea was I was drawing with the milk, but the actual work was the performance of witnessing this happening and kind of these lines of milk kind of infiltrating or kind of, spreading out in this space. And I think, that's kind of, late teens, more performance, but some live drawing there as well.
Does the interaction or the reaction of the crowd fuel you in any way?
I think it comes back to that honesty again. I don't know if it fuels me, but it makes more sense to work with people watching you or experiencing the connection of the work being created in real time than it does for me to be by myself. Like if I'm at home just by myself or in the studio, it just feels like, I might as well just watch TV or something. Like
Yeah.
I'm very easily distracted. I'm definitely someone that likes more, site specific work.
You've often described your art as kind of inspired by this concept of finding your way. With these sayings, like you said, who are you? You are you. What has driven this fascination of the self?
Yeah. I think as artists and creatives and, people alike, we have a core of us. And in that core are, the questions, the thoughts, the ideas, the things that we are trying to uncover and discover in our lives. And I think, if I look back at that core within myself, there's always been questions, and that might be because of my identity, where I grew up, the family that I know and don't know, etc. Maybe it's kind of wound up within that. But even at a young age, I was always obsessed with this idea of, who are we actually without all of the labels that were given by society, with race, class, gender, etc. Like actually when you peel all those away, like what's the core of you and what's the core of me and what's the core of us? And at a young age, we're told like, hey, like what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up? But we're never really taught like, who are you? Like what are your principles?
Yeah, definitely.
What's in your bones? What's in your foundation? And for me, even as a young kid, there was lots of questions. And so as someone that, kind of got older and was more experienced and traveled and educated and all those things, I was like, wow, it really doesn't matter how smart, traveled, educated, wealthy you are, you still don't know who you are at the core. And we don't even have the vocabulary to describe that. If I ask you, what you do or who you are, you're going to tell me the roles that you play, where you're from, maybe something about your family, where you grew up. You're not going to tell me who you are underneath all of that, because I don't even know if we can really articulate that. And so by asking questions of who are you, these big existential questions, you can break those down into just the 3 letters of WAY, which are the first 3 letters of who are you. And so now you can ask that question in a more practical way. So, Winter, how are you finding your way in life? I'm finding my way in life through this language of words and lines and drawings. But by finding my way in a practical way, I can start to answer that big existential question of who I am. And so I think there is that thread that has been there since I was a child, that is a part of that core of me, which, is obsessed with this idea of questions and using those questions as a compass to guide me.
Yeah.
I think if we are asking the right questions, like we're trying to figure out who we are at the core versus what we do and want to do, that question and that core will guide us and prioritize, what we're really trying to achieve in life.
Who is Shantell Martin?
I'm someone that's just trying to find my way in life. And, we spoke a little bit about it just now through exposing my work in live environments, through asking these questions, through being kind, transparent, honest, hardworking, trying to be more of an open, playful human being out there in the world by using this tool of drawing and words and writing to find my way to do that.
Do you think there is a separation between Shantell the person and your work?
Definitely with some artists, there's the work and then there's them and then there's their work persona. I think for me that those things are very much tied up together.
Yeah.
And, not all artists are the same. And I think there's a spectrum of that. But I've noticed that I am my work and my work is me. And there's a very fine line between those two things.
Yeah. How do you feel about the concept of the separation of the art and the artist?
Everyone's on their own journey and their own experience. And the interesting thing about art, a lot of it is self-exploration. And for me, exploring the self is the act of creating art. And so therefore the art is myself. And, I find it interesting that we only exist for a period of time. And in that time as artists, we create a certain amount of work. And that work, in a way, almost becomes like a diary or
Hmm.
a body of work, which is the body outside of the artist body. And, for me, I like that those two things meet and, have a conversation with each other.
From the outside, it looks like you're living the dream as an artist, right? Like you've been full time for many years, you have global acclaim, you show in major institutions, work with major brands. Do you feel like you're successful?
Do I feel like I'm successful? It's interesting because I think, you can graduate from a starving artist, but for me, in some point, you're still a struggling artist if you take the route that I have, and what that route is in the art world, I'm an outsider on the inside, on the outside. Yes, I went to art school, but then I moved to Japan and started my career in the club scene. So when I moved to New York in, the late 2000s, I, was like, okay, I'm an artist. I should work with galleries. And then I would meet with galleries and they say, we love your work. Where have you shown? And, I would say, I haven't. I just came from the club scene of Japan. And they would say, well, thank you, but no thank you. And you realize there's this catch-22 where if you haven't shown, you can't show. And as an artist, I'm not going to not make work because you won't show it. Then I became an outsider trying to create work because I'm an artist and I want to make work, but trying to make it within a system that did not want me,
Yeah.
because they didn't have a place for me. And then later on, I became an insider because, I think the art world and the art market are very two different things. And in the art world, you have academia, you have institutions, you have museums, etc. And so I kind of went that path of working academically and institutionally. But kind of long story short is it's still a struggle because now I'm not starving, but as you succeed and you become a bigger artist, your overhead increases. So now you need to pay for staff and
Yeah.
insurance and studio and art handling and archiving and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then at the same time, because you're more successful, people want you to donate your work or give your time or give this or give that because you're a successful artist. And typically in the past, successful artists do come down wealthy routes with patrons. So by the time that they're successful, they can work with charities and nonprofits and do all of that and not really receive money because they haven't had to worry about money. For a lot of us, like modern day artists, as your expenses increase, now people want you to donate and all of your time, efforts, and money and work because you're successful. And then you're like, well, if I do that, which I would love to do, how do I pay for all of this? So I think it is that balance and it is that it's always, you're always trying to navigate it.
Yeah.
As an artist, you want to have the freedom to create whatever you want, wherever you want, however you want. But if you look through history, artists that have had that privilege have had wealthy patrons.
Definitely. What do you think was a key catalyst of getting you into the art market?
Yeah. And I'm not really participating in the art market. Like, yes, I sell work, but it's not the primarily source of my income. The primary source of my income comes from experiences, it comes from licensing, it comes from installations, it comes from, kind of teaching. It's still not even the art market because that's a world that I still haven't really participated in. But, yes, I sell work here and there, but it's because people have come to me. Or on kind of a smaller scale, I'm selling, kind of prints and merch, but, that's not work that's like 6 or 7 figures.
Yeah. Was there though like a particular activation that kind of, you woke up one after this activation and things had changed for you?
It's interesting because I always think about, when am I going to have that moment? Because a lot of people talk about a person or a moment where things completely changed.
Hmm.
And I think for my career, It's more like climbing stairs. Yes, I'm going up the stairs, but it's in increments. There's these little progressions of like, projects and places and people, and you're improving, and, the scale of the projects are getting bigger and the reach of the projects are getting bigger, but there isn't that massive leap. And actually, I was talking to someone last night because in 2020, I had my first monograph book coming out. I got invited to do a TED talk on the main stage in Vancouver. I was going to do a book launch at the Whitney Museum. And I was like, okay, this is it. You feel like everything has culminated to make sense at this time. And, I remember going to TED the year before and I saw how it changed people's lives. And I was like, okay, this is it. And then, of course, we know how 2020 turned out. And so I think for me, it's interesting because I'll have these big moments in the sense that there's a lot of potential there, but then something will happen. It's Hurricane Sandy, it's the pandemic, it's something like that. And it always happens to be at like almost like a comical moment where it could be that springboard for me. It could be that big pivot. It could be that big moment. And then something happens. And I'm like, maybe that's just how it's meant to be. Maybe for me, if I have that big springboard, maybe there's something I'm missing out on or that I'm not going to experience. And therefore, the universe has put me in this motion where it's a little bit constantly over a long period of time.
Yeah. You have worked with some major brands, like Adidas and Max Mara, and the list really goes on. And I'm curious, how do you typically land these types of brand partnerships?
Yeah. It's interesting when I look through my website, as I kind of update that or reflect on that, I do think it's a little bit crazy in the sense, there's Max Mara, there's Tiffany and Co, there's Kelly Wearstler, there's B&B Italia, New York City Ballet, Boston Ballet, 5 museum shows. It's really surprising to me sometimes even that I've managed to do that many. But to answer your question, those projects come to me. It hasn't worked the other way around. There's definitely been moments in the past where, like, I love a brand, like I love Porsche or I love this or I love that. And you reach out and you say, hey, I'm an artist. Like I make art and I love your brand. I love to do something. And in those situations, it's never worked because they're like, oh, okay, great. You're an artist. Thanks. But no, thank you. Because they don't know who you are. And if people don't know who you are, they don't care who you are. And it's very hard to convince someone that they should work with you, even though you see the potential and the insight there. So, to answer your question, the projects that I've had, for the majority, people will reach out to me. And that's either because they've seen my work out there in the world, or there was some instance in the past, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, where they've worked with me and then over time have moved positions, moved companies, and have called me and said, hey, I've always wanted to work with you. Now I'm at a company and in a position where we can.
Yeah. And I love how that works out sometimes.
Yeah, that's been really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you approach personal branding?
Yeah. So personal branding, I went to school, I went to Central St. Martin's. I studied graphic design, specialized in illustration. And so I think I've always been around kind of design, typography. And then that aside, I think I have a good standard and taste. And so those things coming together, this kind of exposure to design, and then also a high level and standard of what you want from yourself and what you expect of yourself. That is how I approach branding. So anything I do, sometimes even to my detriment, because it can cost a lot of money and take a lot of time, but I want things to look good. I want them to feel good. I want them to feel authentic. It could be my website, it could be logo type, it could be, the podcast branding. Like, I want it to feel like it's mine and that I own it. And within that, if I feel like it's mine and I own it and I'm proud of it, I think that reflects to the outside world. So I'm not necessarily making it for others. I'm making it for me so I feel proud of myself. Like, yeah, that's a good piece of design. And no one needs to really see it, but I'm happy with it.
You have had a lot of consistency, in terms of the black and white palette and what you wear, and how intentional is that?
For myself, I've always just wanted to be comfortable and keep things simple since I was a kid. And I probably dress the same now as I did as an 8-year-old, but just sometimes, slightly nicer things. But style wise, I've always been the same. And I think that intention is just keep things simple and keep them comfortable, keep them to a nice high standard. That's it.
Do you think that your aesthetic and that consistency that you've really cultivated over time has been attractive for brands?
Yeah, I think so, because it gives you a recognizable style. I'm aware that I draw, I'm someone that draws as a career. I do something that literally everyone on the planet, no matter how bodily abled you are, can make a line.
Yeah.
I'm in the business of lines, and I'm in a business where literally everyone can do what I do. So I think about, well, how can I make something recognizably me? And I love the simplicity of lines, but I love the profoundness of that and what that statement means. If my line is recognizable, it means that there is such a level of hard work and confidence and patience that has gone into that. And then, within that, just thinking about, well, branding wise, yeah, I like black and white. If I look at drawings of mine from 20 years ago, there wasn't color in them. It was line based, it was black and white. And so there's just a consistency of me being true to myself and my internal fingerprint and style and identity. It's minimal, it's black and white, it's line work, it asks questions, it's bold, it's playful, it's open. It gives other people permission to also draw and pick up pens. And, I think that is kind of the umbrella that I like to operate under.
Yeah, I know. I love that. And also, I think your success, I know we always want more and it's different for you as it may look to the outside, but I think that the reason you've gotten a lot of these opportunities and that so many brands and organizations, have come to you is also because of that attention to that quality that you're talking about. And I think when, I have a lot of artist friends, and because I work in branding and marketing, I get asked a lot for advice, specifically for artists, like how can I get more opportunities or what am I doing wrong? And I point them, you are a great example for an artist of what it takes, really, of that commitment to that quality, like the way you catalog your work, like you're working with a photographer, like you have really high quality shots of your work, like you can really see it. You clearly have consistency also in your messaging. You have clarity of voice for what your work is about. Like all of these things are not accidental, and your journey has been like a staircase of incremental progress. But I think you've put so much work in the articulation of yourself and your vision, and that is why I think you are where you are today. We know that's expensive, and we know that it's not easy, but I think that goes a long way and is a good message for other artists who look up to you. When artists come to you, and they're like, how do I get to where you are, Shantell? What do you say to them?
So it's interesting. And just to kind of add to your point now, I had a conversation recently with my artist friend Rabbi on my podcast. And, he was like, I invest in myself. I invest in my research, materials, ideas, and I can relate to that. I've spent a lot of money documenting my work. I spent a lot of money kind of producing, creating work, and even some of that work ends up being given away. If it's like my typography, like Shantell Sans, that's a font that I spent a lot of money on and then I gave it away. But for me, it's just me investing in myself. And I think I get a lot of artists, younger artists or, even kind of older artists from different industries that say, how do you do what you do? And I just say, take your time. You're in no rush, a little bit constantly. And it makes me think of, many, many years ago, some advice that I got was like, hey, Shantell, if you want to do this art thing, you got to take an audit of you. You got to understand your strengths and you got to understand your weaknesses. And you've also got to see being an artist like a cocktail or a combination of things. So if you do an audit, like, are you sociable? Do you show up to things? Can you do your taxes? Are you organized? Do you keep a clean space? Like, do you know where things are? Just like even those like little things. Are you a good public speaker? Can you speak about your work? Are you? And so I remember at that time doing an audit of myself and being like, well, if this is a business, I should know a little bit about all of the business. I don't need to become an expert in all of these areas, but it's beneficial of me to educate myself on the business that I'm in. I'm in the business of art that requires accounting, taxes, legal, archiving, all of those things. And so I started to educate and get to know all of those kind of different orbits and areas. And so, if I had a project, or still today, I'll read all the contracts. I try and leave those in a better place than I found them. I try to understand tax law. I try to understand accounting. I'm trying to understand all of these facets that make up what it is to be an artist today. If you're not coming from a privileged position where you can have people do all of those things for you.
Yeah.
And so I think the advice would be, just to summarize, is like, take your time. You're in no rush. This is a lifelong pursuit. It would be do an audit of your strengths and weaknesses and, kind of try and become an all-rounder in all of those things so that you're not showing up and being like, how's that artist doing this? And like, I don't even like their work, or, it's like they're doing it because they're organized in all of the other things.
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
do that audit and then just, show up for yourself in an honest and true, kind way.
Yeah, I think also just to kind of expand on that, like to be an artist today and do it full time and make revenue and sell your work and have partnerships is to be also treat yourself with the respect of a business.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of artists struggle with that.
Well, I think, if you look at the art system, we go through art school. We're not taught about business negotiations, contracts, consignments by design, and that design is that, well, you're an artist, you make the work, and everyone else in between, they deal with all of that stuff and they take a profit. And, now you have the people consuming the work and the living artist making the work here, and all these different people in between that can talk about business, that can talk about money, that can talk about those infrastructures, but you're not meant to as an artist because it's taboo. That's fine if you come from a privileged place where you can, I don't want to use the word neglect, but you can choose not to have a role in all of that.
Yeah.
But the thing is today as a living artist, we got to pay rent. We've got bills to pay. And so, it should not be taboo to talk about a fundamental part of your work, which is the business and the money side of things. And, I often say to artists who say, hey, like, I can't talk about money. I don't want to talk about that. It's like taboo. I'm saying, well, when you make work and the goal for your work is for it to go into a gallery, what's your hope and intention when it goes to a gallery? And they're like, well, I want it to be sold. So I'm like, okay, so what is it sold for? And they're like, money. Okay, so an integral part of you being an artist, wanting to show in galleries and sell that work for money, it's money, And so the fact that we've all been taught as artists that it's taboo to talk about that, but everyone else can, I think that needs to change.
Definitely.
Because the gallery take 50%. And as an artist, you get paid the other 50%, but then you still have to pay for your materials, your costs, your time, your insurance, your staff, your et cetera, et cetera. So by the time you take something home, it's a fraction of what it could or should be.
Yeah, and I think the art world has changed so much with the rise of social media and the democratization too of now you are able to build your own community, potentially sell directly to your own audience and monetize in other ways. How has social media and the rise of it, over the past decade or so impacted your career?
I think the biggest way it's impacted me is that perhaps people who wouldn't have seen my work have seen it. Personally, I am someone that underutilizes it. I probably could use social media a lot more than I do. I post and I ghost.
Hmm.
And I've always done that. I've always kind of ignored it, or it's just been something I've done or I'll walk away from, but then I'm like, I should do that. And then I'll come back to it. And I don't like to give it my full attention because I don't like to be online that much. And in the past, I've tried to hire people, be like, okay, well, if I don't like it, I should have someone else do it. And then, you have people come in and they do an audit and they have, like they tell you what your brand represents and they build a schedule for you. And then that lasts for about a month. And then you're like, this
Yeah.
doesn't really work. So I am also in that position where, I'm trying to rethink that again. Like, what can I do with my social? It's there, it exists. But I'm trying to do it in a way now that's more holistic, like looking at that as a community. Like there are people that can relate to me and my work, from many different angles. It could be identity, it could be dyslexia, it could be creativity, it could be drawing. So how can I navigate my community and build a home and a space for them? So I think, to answer the question in a way, I'm trying to constantly have that conversation with myself of what to do with social. But what it has done for me today as an artist, I believe, is it's exposed my work to a demographic that wouldn't necessarily see it in person.
Do you think social has driven a lot of business opportunities for you?
It's hard to say because I think a lot of the projects I have had, people have seen my work in real life.
Hmm.
And so I think also sometimes what you're doing in real life and the energy and atmosphere you create in a room sometimes doesn't translate to social. But, I'm in New York, so I'm bumping into people and I haven't seen these people in years, but they're like, I'm keeping an eye. I see what you're up to. I'm proud of you, Shantell. I see all these projects. And so I think there is that thing where social keeps that conversation going with you and others, even though you haven't seen them physically. And those could be people that you know or people that are unknown.
Yeah. How big is your current team?
So my team, I have 3 people, 2 of them part-time, 1 of them full-time. And actually, I can't remember if it was early this year or late last year, but this was the first time I hired someone ever full-time. And that's what's given me time to then go away and do my podcast and do some other things that I never had time before. But I think most of the time I've been in New York, it was mostly just me and then one half person, part-time person. But this is kind of the biggest team that I've had. But we have someone that's in New York that's part-time that can go to our archive here, if we have work that's coming in or that's going out. That can do condition reports for, any work that we have here on the East Coast. I have someone that's remote, that's more administrative, scheduling, project managing. And then I have someone now that is full-time collection manager that oversees the archive. So I have over, 2,000 pieces in my own collection of my work since that, I create this work and then it comes back to me. And it's very important for me that is a organized body of work where it's photographed, we got dimensions, we got condition reports, it lives in an inventory system, we know where it is, what it is, when it was made, the provenance of it, the exhibition history of it, all of the above.
Yeah, that's very, very impressive. One thing that I did want to ask, stemming off our previous conversation, was about I'm curious in the art community, with fellow artists and colleagues, do you ever get accused of being like a sellout, or does this concept come up for you?
So I talk about this concept of a sellout when I do public speaking sometimes. So, okay, you are in any other business, you're doing a startup, for example. Okay, you're doing a startup. That's amazing.
Hmm.
You need some startup capital. You need a board of advisors. You need a fancy office. Here's a startup lawyer. Here's a 5-year plan. Here's a 10-year plan. Here's a roadmap of how you get there and how you progress. And here's all the resources of that can help you along that way. You're an artist. Good luck.
Yep.
And if you succeed, we'll call you a sellout. And sometimes within certain industries, we build in these reflexes to keep people in a certain place. And, as I mentioned with artists, we have this almost butler system where you have the living artist making the work, you have the consumer consuming the work, and then you have all these people in between that kind of are handing over the art to the consumer. It's almost like a butler service. And I feel like that reflex of like being a sellout is built into that butler system to keep artists in their place. What would happen if we actually saw and supported our artists? What if we didn't romanticize the idea of a struggling or a starving artist? What if we romanticize the idea of a successful, thriving artist? Someone that when they succeeded, we would applaud them. And why do we call our artists when they succeed sellouts? Like, really, if you break that down, are we not supporting the arts? Do we not want more arts in school? You hear all these arguments of like, they're taking art out of school. Well, of course they are, because we don't support our artists to be living, thriving, supporting artists. And I think terms like that are kind of built into the culture to keep this class of people that are creative, that can have an impact, that can steer culture, that have a voice, that have a message in a certain place.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's about seeing the value that the artist provides. And it does provide a lot of value, just like entertainment is value, or any kind of like experience that you're getting that improves your life. And even if it's in a small way, even if it's fleeting, has value.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I do want artists to understand that they're not begging for money when they're selling their work. It's a value exchange.
And that's the thing. It comes back to, as an artist, and it goes into a system, it goes into the gallery system, they're selling it for money. Why, as an independent artist, are you not allowed to do the same thing and talk about it more frankly? If you're a musician and you get signed to a label, they put a whole team around you. They put a whole infrastructure around you. They give you a plan. And I think with being an independent artist, there is no real clear ROI to start up with or to start off with. But also, I think so many people benefit from this industry that is unregulated as well.
I'm curious, when you're in talks with an institution to do a big show, or someone wants to hire you to do a large mural, or a shoe, whatever it may be, how do you approach those conversations and your pricing structure, and how do you know your value, or do you have kind of a strategy for how you are like quoting these projects?
So I think in a way this comes back to that question of like, a moment in your life that has, springboarded, or whatever the concept is there. But I'm happy that in my life I've had this incremental kind of climb, because what that has meant is that I've gained experience at a good pace over time throughout the years. And so also I've felt my value and my confidence grow over the years. And with that, you start to understand your own value and what you deserve. And I think sometimes if you're catapulted right to the top, that you haven't really felt that you own that and that you deserve that. You're just suddenly there. So I'm grateful for that. For me, when brands, institutions approach me, there's almost like an initial checklist that I go through. Is this brand ethically and morally something I agree with? Would I be able to expose my work to a different demographic? Is this something I'm not able to do by myself? Is this something that I'm excited for? Is there a clear exchange of value and respect from this client or this brand? And do I even have time for this? So if I'm saying yes to all of those things, then you come to the table. And then now, because I have this past experience, it means I have a starting point of what I used to charge, and we have a current point of what we charge now and where we're at. And I think, with brands and with institutions, there's often that kind of cat and mouse initial conversation where they're like, we have this big project, what's a ballpark figure?
Right.
And then our team are like, well, what's your budget? Because we give them a ballpark figure and then they say it's out of our budget.
Yeah.
And so there's that initial dance beforehand where they're like, well, what would you charge? And then you're like, well, what's your budget? Well, we don't have a budget. Well, you do have a budget because we asked for this and now it's too much. So, so there's a little bit of that. But I think, to summarize and then also add to is that we have like a small, medium, large, because I want to be someone that is still able to do a spectrum of projects. I want to do the big, flashy, institutional, high impact, high visibility, large budget projects. But I also want to be able to do smaller nonprofits, kind of educational budgets and projects. So we kind of divide these up into small, medium, large. So if you're a massive brand that come to us, you're automatically going to go into that large bucket, and we have a baseline for that. If you're a medium brand, you're going to go into that. If you're a small institutional charity, you're going to go into that. Then there's the initial questions of okay, so what is this? What's the scope of this? Is this a product? Is it an experience? Is there exclusivity attached? Is this non-exclusive? How much time is it going to take? And so we work towards first having an initial agreement, which is almost a licensing agreement. If anyone comes to us with a work for hire, it's already a deal breaker. No, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You do not respect the art or us. Go away. And the thing is like a lot of people will come to you with a work for hire saying, well, it's just easier that we own everything because then we can do what we want with it. And you're like, no, that's not what this is. A work for hire is that you own it for perpetuity and you can do whatever you want for it. And ethically and morally, I don't agree with that. So that's a pass. So, you work out, it's a license agreement. You're working towards time, scope, budget, deliverables. There's usually a fee attached to that. And then once you've decided what that is, then there's a separate agreement, which is the marketing. So, you're going to make art to promote the art. What does that look like? And then the marketing is usually a separate agreement. There's often a lot of back and forth with indemnification. They want to put all the liability, etc., on you as an independent artist. And I'm always like, anything that you ask of me, you need to be okay with us asking that of you. So if there's, any insurance, why are we covering this? You should be covering that. If there's any indemnification, that should be mutual. And that goes for a lot of other things as well.
How do you balance kind of your being true to your, what you want to make creatively and like their business objectives?
So I think the biggest thing is saying no to things that don't feel right to you, because what that does is eventually it puts you in a position where people aren't going to ask you for things that don't work for you or with you or represent the brand. In the past, I'll be invited to do a mural and they say, well, can you send us a sketch of what you're going to do? And I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do because I show up and I just do it. Yeah, but we need a sketch to approve it. I don't work that way. I don't do pre-sketches. I show up and I improvise and what I create fits that space. Here are examples of what I've done in the past. But that company is just used to approving something beforehand.
Right.
That's just the internal mechanism. And you say, hey, well, if you need to know what it is before I do it, here's a list of other artists that I love and admire who love to work that way. You might want to work with them. Then they might come and say, thank you, like, we'll go in that direction. Or they might come back and be like, oh, no. Like, we're okay with you coming and doing what you want to do and, following your process. But you can only get there if you say no to the things that don't feel right to you. So that puts you in a position where you're saying yes. Often brands will have kind of their own agendas because, they're spending money and capital to promote, to market what they're doing. And if you've ticked a lot of those boxes initially in the first place, that's an easy conversation to make sure everyone wins.
Yeah, no, I love that. the idea of sticking to your process and being able to say no, which in some ways is, not everyone's in the position.
Hmm.
Sometimes we are in these places of like, I need the money, so we'll just say yes, which sucks. But
But in the past, I'm like sleeping on my friend's couch,
yeah,
and this project comes in, it pays well. Oh my god, I can get off my friend's couch and rent a room for the first time. But I don't agree with it. I'm going to say no. And I think that comes down to like your plan A needs to be the same as your plan B, C. If your plan is just to make money and just make things easy for yourself, then don't be an artist. Unless you have parents or someone paying for that, don't be an artist, because you have to make these hard decisions so that you can be authentic to yourself.
you've said in a YouTube video, um, when it pertains to being an artist, like don't do it unless you can't do anything
Hmm.
else. What do you mean by that?
Being an artist is such a bizarre career choice. We put all of these kids into art school and we say one day you can be an artist, but we don't tell them about the repercussions of being an artist or the struggles of it or how hard it is, or the lack of respect in it, and the just how hard it is to break into things or do things, or the fact that there's so many artists out there trying to do what you do. And so I think, if your plan A isn't the same as B and C, which is I'm going to be an artist at all costs, I'm going to make this happen, I'm going to take my time, this is a lifetime pursuit, I'm going to do a little bit constantly and it's going to work. If that isn't your sentiment, and you're not okay with struggling through that period of time, do something else. Like go get a different job. And
Yeah.
sometimes I wish I could go get a proper job, like a 9 to 5, and then I know when I'm clocking on and clocking off, and I know how much money I get every month, and then I can look forward to my weekends and my time off. And I wish that for myself sometimes, because being an artist is an internal and a long struggle that we all face. And so, unless this is something you really, really, really want, go do something else.
How do you feel about art school?
So, art school, yeah. I have mixed feelings with art school, because, if you did an audit at the end of every year, a year finishes and then you follow those students for the next 10, 20 years of your life. How many of those students actually become artists that make a living through their practice? I think it's quite slim. I think more and more we have creative industries where people might not necessarily become artists, and they go into, UX and design and ad agencies, etc. And I think, there's more of those careers. But, for the students going to school for sculpture and painting and, those types of industries and crafts, how many of them actually come out and can be artists? And I think the answer is it's very, very slim.
Very, yeah.
But we are building bigger and bigger and bigger schools. We are going into schools when kids are younger and younger and younger and saying, hey, you should be an artist. You could be an artist. We're not telling them about the repercussions of student loans and debt, and, how hard it is to get a career in the arts, and maybe it takes 25 years for your career to actually turn into something and make money. We don't say that. We're just like, here's the arts, it's creative, you should do it. And I think sometimes art school is big business. It's about numbers, how many kids they can get into the school. It's about how much real estate and property that the school can buy up. If you look at all the schools around, one of the biggest agenda is just to buy more real estate, buy more real estate, buy more real estate. Okay, now we need more tuition, more tuition, more tuition to pay for the real estate. And then a lot of these people right at the top make a lot of money. And you saw that, I think someone was telling me about, is it the Cooper Union School here in New York that was in Astor Place? And, it was set up in a way where the land paid for the school, and so people could go there for free. But then, board members started selling off the land and then making kids, pay tuition, and because it's a business.
Right.
And so I think, there needs to be some ethical, responsible education that is given to young adults who perhaps are taking out loans, pulling themselves in debts, putting themselves in positions where they're not getting other sorts of education under sometimes the guise of like, you can be an artist. Maybe they can, but are we really being responsible?
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, I can hear, I can hear my old art teacher's head in my back of my voice. And, sometimes I talk about when I was 16 and, you start to finish school in England and you choose your next stage in life. And I wanted to go to art school. And my teacher told me not to apply because I wouldn't get in. And, at the time people were like, oh, that's that bad art teacher. But I was like, oh, maybe he was just being at that time with the information and knowledge that he had, like responsible, like, hey, like maybe do something else because, the options over here are kind of narrow. I didn't have anyone telling me what I should do, so I did something that someone told me I didn't do. I'm not telling people not to go to art school, but I'm just saying understand that the arts and education as a whole is big business, and please educate yourself on debt that you might get yourself into doing that. So perhaps there's different mediums or industries or subjects that you could pursue that maybe you can pivot from, that give you a strong foundation, that give you more of a rounded education that you could be more flexible with.
I completely agree, especially as an art history major myself, doing something completely different. There really needs to be ingrained in these departments. If you're studying painting, for example, you also should be taking branding, marketing, and business classes and learning how to promote your work on social and how to show up correctly, how to build your deck, your personal deck, like a media kit, for example, to talk about your work and present your work professionally, really preparing students for entering the world and like the differences between working with a gallery versus selling, direct to consumer. And it really is a disservice. I think I have a lot of qualms with art schools for just the lack of education properly well-rounded that I think it should be.
Yeah, 100%. And it's getting a little bit better because they have to, because those tools are clearly there and, people could go elsewhere. They could go to the school of YouTube or, other online schools. So they're having to, slowly introduce, finance education, kind of business education, but it's still very, very slow and slim.
Definitely. Well, I want to talk about a little bit. You recently started a podcast. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So I started a podcast called What's the Point? And I felt myself having a little bit of an existential crisis probably over the last year. I moved to LA. It's very quiet. I got too much time to think. I'm not as busy as I am when I'm in New York. And you get to this point where you're like, okay, I make art. And then at some point I'm gone and, what was the point? And, I spend all this time and money and investment in kind of archiving my work and, for what point? And so I was feeling very uninspired and a little bit lost about being an artist. And what I found helped is speaking to other artists. Like, hey, you're an artist. Like, why do you do what you do? Like, who is it for? Like, why can't you get another job? Like, tell me about your journey. And in those conversations, I would find that I would be re-inspired, that I would find things that I could relate to, that I would be inspired by their journeys and their travels, even, ending up in different places, kind of medium-wise or physically, etc. And so I thought, let me make this a much broader kind of collection of interviews, conversations. I love the idea of also kind of oral archives, kind of talking to these artists in the moment and place that they are in their careers as a way of cataloging that moment. And so I started this series called What's the Point? It's audio only. I only speak to artists that I've met in person. I do all the interviews in person because I think there's something very special about that.
Definitely.
And I find out about their journey, what their first exposures to art were, what their struggles were, what their triumphs are, what their team looks like, why they can't do something else, what their hopes are, what they think the point of art is. And for me, I've found a lot of benefit to myself for this. And I hope that others will too, not just only artists, but people in creative fields.
I love that. Yeah, I relate to that a lot because that's a big part of why we wanted to do Deep Feed podcast as well. Because I think there's so much you get when you are talking to someone.
Hmm.
That is like I'm learning from all the interviews I'm doing, and same thing. Like I'm getting re-inspired, or I'm like I didn't think about this that way, or whatever. So, I see myself as this like medium for the audience. Like I'm trying to ask you questions that I think they want to know and so that they get a lot of value. But I selfishly am also able to be in this room with you and get that value too. So I think podcasts, and interviews in general are really great ways of learning and staying engaged for sure.
Yeah, completely.
Has there been a similar drive for when you create a book, such as Lines, which is right behind me, and I'll link in the description? Um, when you create a project like a podcast or a book, what is the experience there?
So for the podcast, it's immediate. You're sitting down with a person, you've met the person, you're finding out about them in that moment, in that time. And, it's about where you're both at in that point. And some reflection, some looking forward, some hopes, some dreams. When you're making a book, we have my first monograph behind you, Lines. That was a long-term project. I think it took over a year to make.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an effort of many. I think it expands kind of over 25 years of work, which meant finding photography from photographers that I'd worked with over the years, and the challenges of, you just assuming that if someone photographed you, they'll still have those photographs and have them high res and ready to go. But that's not the case. People's computers get lost, drives get corrupted. Some photographers don't keep stuff after 5 years. So there were all these hurdles that we had to climb through to, collect all of this documentation. And then, the efforts of others, Catherine Stout from the ICA in London wrote the essay, and Hans Ulrich did the interview. So, finding time to speak with them and have them, kind of put words to the piece as well. So a book is definitely a much longer project. So, for many years, I've wanted to create an interactive memoir, and I just haven't done anything. I've sat down, I wrote an outline, I thought about some of the ways that people could interact with it physically as a book. But then it just hasn't gone anywhere. So I think sometimes those book projects can take many, many years.
Definitely. Yeah, I hope to one day turn Deep Feed into a book. Similarly to how Debbie Millman has turned her podcast into a book as well. But she's been doing this for many years. I think it'll be in the future. But excited to kind of reflect and have that
Yeah.
process.
And I'm sure she wanted to do that book for many years, and it
Yeah.
took many years to get kind of into a stage where it existed.
Well, looking ahead, I'm curious what's on the horizon for you in terms of projects that you're excited about.
So it's October almost, 2024. And so I have an installation at the Rockefeller Center. I have a bike collaboration coming out with Brompton Bicycles, who are one of the oldest fold-up bike companies in the world. And from October 1st to November 20th, I have the Path, a meditation of lines that is opening in Times Square. And that will be almost a 200-foot long meditation path in Times Square, one of the most chaotic places in the country, that will provide people with a moment of reprieve, of meditation, of metaphorically or physically putting one foot in front of the other and, giving themselves the permission to walk. And, I'm super excited for that project. Coming into next year, I'll be choreographing my second ballet for the Los Angeles Ballet.
Nice.
So that will happen in March 2025. And, aside from that, I'm on this, the constant goal of, working towards that freedom of creation to make whatever I want, wherever I want, however I want. So trying to find a team or a way to make that happen.
I love that. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for taking the time to come in to Deep Feed and share your wisdom with us. So much good stuff, and I really hope artists do take away a lot of your advice here and start to believe in themselves more too. and really like grow their careers in the way that you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've been enjoying Deep Feed and the journey that the podcast is on. So thank you.